I never imagined my own family could turn against me. This morning, I opened an email that felt like a punch to the chest. "You are not allowed to attend your sister's wedding." My hands shook, my heart raced, and every memory of our childhood flashed like a film I didn't want to watch. But then I noticed a single line at the bottom, almost hidden. A clue, a whisper of a secret no one ever told me. If I don't act, everyone will celebrate a lie, and I'll be erased from the story. I had to find a way to make them hear me. I stared at my computer screen, frozen, as the words blurred before my eyes. "You are not allowed to attend your sister's wedding." My heart felt like it had dropped into a pit that had no bottom. I blinked several times, convinced that I was reading it wrong, that somehow my mind had tricked me. But the email, sent from my own mother's address, was very real. I sank into the chair, my chest tightening, a strange combination of disbelief and hurt washing over me. How could this happen? How could the people who raised me, who were supposed to protect me, decide that I was unworthy of witnessing a moment that was supposed to unite our family? The first thought that crossed my mind was denial. Surely there had been some kind of mistake. I tried calling my mother, hoping to hear her voice, to explain it away, but she didn't answer. The voicemail sounded deliberate, rehearsed, polite, yet final, and it cut deeper than the email ever could. I felt my fingers trembling as I scrolled back through old messages, searching for clues, hints, anything that could explain this cruelty. There was nothing, only the undeniable truth staring back at me. I had been banned. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Memories of my childhood flashed through me, both tender and painful. Birthdays when my sister had received every present I ever wanted first. Holidays where I was quietly reminded that I was always second, and all the tiny ways my accomplishments were overlooked. Had I been too sensitive? Had I misinterpreted things all along, imagining slights where none existed? But the sting of that email told me the truth. This wasn't imagination. This was intentional. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the grief roll over me like a heavy tide. I could feel tears forming, but I forced them back. I refused to let them fall just yet. Not here, not now. I needed to think. And then I noticed it. A single line at the very bottom of the email, almost invisible against the pale background. It wasn't bolded or marked. It was just there. A hint, a whisper, a trace of something hidden. If you truly want to understand, look beyond what you've been told. I read it over and over, and a shiver ran down my spine. My pulse quickened with a strange combination of fear and curiosity. What did she mean? Beyond what I had been told? What could they possibly be hiding from me? I grabbed my phone and opened my browser, diving into the endless abyss of social media, hoping, praying to find answers. Reddit threads about families, betrayal, hidden grudges. TikTok clips where people shared experiences of being ostracized, banned from weddings, excluded from their own lives. Even YouTube vlogs where the pain of being unseen was laid bare in front of strangers. Each story resonated, each one echoing my own disbelief, my own heartbreak. Was I alone in this? Or was this some twisted pattern, some tradition of secrecy and control that families perpetuate without anyone daring to question? As I scrolled, I found myself muttering, almost conversationally, as if you were there with me. Can you imagine being told you don't belong in your own family? Can you imagine being erased like a ghost from something so sacred? I imagined you nodding, or maybe raising your eyebrows in shock. I wanted you to feel my confusion, my helplessness, as I did. And then, just when I thought my heart couldn't possibly squeeze any tighter, I came across a comment buried beneath dozens of others. Someone mentioned siblings holding grudges for years, hiding slights, letting misunderstandings fester until the moment of revelation explodes. The words hit me like a slap to the face. Could it be true? Had my sister harbored some resentment toward me, quietly simmering beneath the surface, waiting for this moment to declare her victory? I thought about our last real conversation years ago. It wasn't even a fight, not in the traditional sense. But there was tension, sharp words exchanged in passing, and I had brushed them off. She must have remembered. She must have kept that memory, every detail, every slight I hadn't even recognized. I felt my stomach twist. The notion that the celebration of her love, a wedding, could be tainted by unspoken grudges made my head spin. And yet, the more I dwelled on it, the more I realized the situation wasn't only about her. It was my parents, too. Their decision to support this exclusion, to align with one child over the other, revealed the pattern that had shaped my entire life. I tried to calm myself, to breathe, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. What if this was only the surface? What if there was more, layers hidden beneath polite smiles and perfectly orchestrated family traditions? That line at the end of the email haunted me, its ambiguity pressing me toward action. I had to understand, had to know why, and most importantly, had to find a way to be heard. No one could erase me from this narrative without a response. I couldn't just accept the role of the invisible sibling. I closed my laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of the shock settle into my bones. It was overwhelming, yes, but amidst the fear and the hurt, a small ember of determination flickered inside me. I would figure it out. I had to. I didn't yet know how, but I knew the first step was to observe, to gather information, and to prepare for the moment when the truth could no longer be hidden. Every memory, every tiny, overlooked interaction would become part of my understanding, my arsenal, my means of reclaiming my voice. And as I sat there, the quiet of my apartment pressing in, I realized something else. I was not powerless. They had tried to erase me, to make me invisible, but this spark, this awareness, this pulse of curiosity and defiance, it was mine, and it was enough to begin. I sat at my kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper staring back at me, taunting me with the silence I didn't know how to break. My hands hovered over the pen, unsure where to start, but I knew I had to capture everything I had been holding inside for years. The disappointment, the anger, the moments of invisibility that had accumulated into this unbearable weight. I started with the easiest truths, the memories that burned hottest, the birthdays when my accomplishments were ignored, the holidays where my sister's needs always came first, the subtle comments my parents made that carved into my confidence without ever being overtly cruel. I wrote them all down, not as an accusation, but as a reflection, a mirror that exposed the patterns that had shaped my life. As I wrote, the words began to flow faster, unearthing feelings I hadn't allowed myself to name before. I told them about the sting of being overlooked, the quiet grief that had settled in me over the years, and the moments where I questioned my worth, not in the abstract, but in relation to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. My pen trembled as I wrote about the betrayal I felt, about the subtle wars of favoritism, about the way my sister and parents had aligned against me without ever explicitly saying so. Each word was a release, a confession, a warning, all rolled into one. I paused and reread the lines I had written, feeling the surge of emotion welling up. It was overwhelming, and for the first time that day, I let the tears fall freely. They blurred the words on the paper, but I didn't care. The release was necessary, a pause in the storm of tension I had been living under. My body shook, and I breathed in the sorrow, letting it settle in a place that felt both heavy and liberating. This was my moment to grieve, my private acknowledgement of the pain that had been dismissed for too long. Once I regained some control, I returned to the paper, my hand steadier, my thoughts sharper. I began weaving in the secrets I had uncovered, the hints of discord that no one had acknowledged, the truths that could not stay hidden any longer. I ended the letter with a sentence that felt both daring and terrifying, a line that hinted at a revelation large enough to shake the family, yet carefully ambiguous to ensure that the shock would be immediate, unexpected, and unforgettable. I didn't know if anyone would understand the gravity of it, but I knew I had to try. The next step was planning how this letter would reach its audience, Not in a whisper, not in a quiet confrontation, but in a way that would ensure it could not be ignored. I reached out to the groom, careful to convey the timing without revealing the contents. I trusted him, and the plan hinged on his discretion. He would be the vehicle for my words, the conduit through which the truth would finally surface. My stomach tightened as I imagined him reading it aloud in front of everyone, the weight of the silence that would follow, the gasps, the shocked expressions. It was audacious, maybe reckless, but necessary. I reviewed every detail, rehearsing in my mind how he would receive the letter, how he might react, and how the family would be caught off guard. I thought about the possible responses: disbelief, anger, tears, confusion, guilt. Each possibility was a tool in the emotional landscape I was about to navigate, and I had to remain mindful of my own presence, or absence. My invisibility until the reading would amplify the impact, the absence of my physical presence creating a tension that words alone could not achieve. I found myself imagining the moment over and over: the bride walking down the aisle, the groom holding the letter, the camera capturing every reaction without anyone suspecting that this was orchestrated. I felt a rush of power, not malicious, but a reclaiming of the voice that had been silenced for years. My pulse raced with anticipation. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth, about asserting my existence in a family that had attempted to erase it. And yet, even in my planning, a shadow of doubt crept in. What if he didn't read it? What if they dismissed it? The thought twisted in my stomach like a storm, threatening to undo the careful resolve I had built. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, imagining the impact, imagining the cascade of emotions that would follow. The uncertainty added a cruel edge to my anticipation, a micro cliffhanger in real life that kept my adrenaline simmering. If they didn't read it, everything would be meaningless. If they did, the revelation could unravel decades of hidden resentment in a single moment. As the evening deepened, I folded the letter neatly and slid it into its envelope, sealing it with a mix of reverence and fear. This simple act, so ordinary in appearance, carried the full weight of my intentions. I had set the stage, designed the timing, and entrusted the delivery to someone who would honor the plan. Yet, as I placed it aside, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night to come would challenge me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The stakes were higher than just emotions. They were about identity, recognition, and the fragile ties of a family strained to the breaking point. I allowed myself one final moment to cry, not out of despair, but as a preparation, a cleansing of the nerves, a quiet acknowledgement that what I was about to do would demand everything I had. The letter sat on the table like a silent witness to my resolve, and I whispered to myself, almost as if you were there: if they don't read this, it will all be meaningless. But if they do? The ellipsis hung in the air, unfinished, teasing, impossible to ignore. I didn't know what would follow, but I knew I was ready to find out. I waited in the shadows near the back entrance of the chapel, my hands clutching the edges of my coat as if it could shield me from the intensity of what was happening inside. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and polished wood, mingling with the soft hum of conversations that carried laughter, excitement, and an undercurrent of anticipation. I could see the bride and her party moving gracefully through the crowd, every detail meticulously planned: the color of the dresses, the alignment of chairs, the placement of the candles. It all felt surreal, a world I had once been a part of but was now excluded from, and that absence pressed down on me with a quiet weight. As I watched from my hidden vantage point, my heart raced with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Every smile, every glance between family members was a reminder of my exclusion, yet it also gave me a sense of anticipation. If they could see me now, if only for a moment, would they understand the depth of my pain? I tried to steady my breathing, to anchor myself in the moment, but the tension made each second stretch endlessly. My mind wandered back to simpler times, Family dinners where laughter had masked the subtle rivalries, the stolen moments when my sister and I had fought over trivial matters, and my parents' gentle yet unequal attention. Those memories softened the sharpness of the present moment, providing brief breaths of familiarity and empathy that reminded me why this confrontation, this revelation, mattered so much. I shifted my gaze to the crowd, observing familiar faces, noting who was distracted, who was suspicious, and who seemed oblivious to the underlying tensions that had brought me to this point. My stomach tightened with each passing second, the anticipation building like a storm just beyond the horizon. I felt a surge of determination. This was my chance to make my voice heard, to claim my place, even if only through the words I had written. The thought gave me a strange combination of comfort and fear. As the ceremony progressed, I noticed the groom moving subtly, glancing at a small envelope in his hand. My pulse quickened. This was the moment. Every decision, every preparation, every detail I had orchestrated led to this precise point. He adjusted his posture, giving me a tiny, imperceptible nod. I felt the invisible connection between us, a silent communication that the plan was in motion. My breath caught as I imagined him reading my words aloud, the full weight of the truth descending upon the unsuspecting crowd. In that suspended moment, my mind drifted briefly to my sister, unaware of what was coming. I remembered the time she had laughed at one of my ideas, her eyes sparkling with mischief while I had felt invisible. I thought of my parents, their faces etched with authority and expectation, blind to the quiet storm brewing behind their careful facades. The recollection was both painful and grounding, a reminder that this was not an act of vengeance, but a reclamation of my presence, my voice, and my truth. The groom shifted again, his hand subtly resting on the envelope, and I realized the delicate timing was critical. One wrong move, one hesitation, and the moment would lose its impact. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm, to control the trembling in my fingers. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, yet beneath the fear there was a spark of exhilaration. I was about to turn years of silence into a single, undeniable statement, and the weight of that realization made every nerve in my body tense. And then, almost imperceptibly, one of my cousins leaned closer to the groom, murmuring a question about the envelope. My stomach lurched. Would they guess the contents before it was my time? Could the secret slip out too early, diminishing the carefully constructed effect? I held my breath as the groom replied with a simple shake of his head, and I felt a fleeting surge of relief. The plan remained intact. The suspense tightened around me like a living thing, both terrifying and thrilling. As the music swelled and the bride took her place, the groom opened the envelope just slightly, and his eyes scanned the words I had poured my soul into. I imagined each syllable echoing across the room, the expressions of the guests flickering from curiosity to confusion to shock. My pulse quickened, and I couldn't resist a quiet thought, almost a whisper to you. Do you feel the tension? Do you sense the weight of what's about to unfold? It was a strange intimacy, sharing the anticipation with an unseen companion, yet it grounded me in the reality of my own emotions. A murmur ran through a section of the audience. Someone had glanced, guessed, or pieced together part of the message, creating a subtle micro cliffhanger. Their whispered speculation did nothing to diminish the drama. Instead, it amplified it, making the moment feel both precarious and inevitable. I clenched my fists, the familiar ache of long-suppressed anger and sorrow intertwining with the rush of impending revelation. This was the culmination of every slight, every overlooked word, every instance of favoritism or neglect. I exhaled slowly, letting a fraction of the tension ease, though my nerves remained taut with anticipation. The envelope rested lightly in the groom's hands, the eyes of the room gradually turning toward him as the final moments of stillness stretched out. I could feel the collective curiosity, the expectation, the unspoken wonder, and it fed my focus, making me hyper-aware of every heartbeat and movement. And yet, even in this charged silence, I allowed myself a moment to remember who I was, to remember the years that had led to this act of revelation, and to prepare for the emotional whirlwind that was about to follow. The moment arrived with a silence that felt heavier than any sound I had ever known. The groom, standing at the front of the chapel, cleared his throat and held the envelope in his hands as if it were a fragile artifact containing the weight of decades. My stomach twisted, a knot of anticipation and fear, as every eye in the room turned toward him, and then he spoke my name. Serena Whitman. The sound of it echoed across the space, and a wave of stillness followed, as if the world itself had paused to witness what was about to unfold. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it would give me away, betray the storm of emotions inside me. I watched the groom open the envelope carefully, his eyes scanning the words I had written, and felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The letter I had crafted, every word chosen to reveal truth without cruelty, every line designed to illuminate the hidden tensions, was now alive in the room. As he read, the first layer of revelation surfaced. My parents' subtle favoritism, their unacknowledged bias toward my sister, the ways they had allowed old grudges to fester and shape our family dynamic. The congregation shifted, some faces tightening, some eyebrows raising in astonishment. The truths I had buried, truths I had once thought I would carry alone, were now visible to everyone. I noticed my sister stiffen, her eyes darting between our parents and the groom. A flicker of guilt, or maybe fear, passed over her face, betraying a knowledge she had tried to mask for years. The words on the page spoke not only of past injustices, but also of the quiet rivalry, the unspoken resentments that had grown beneath the surface. She had never admitted them, and my parents had chosen to ignore them, creating a tension that had been simmering unnoticed until this precise moment. The twist was subtle but powerful. The letter framed these truths in a way that shifted the perspective, making the audience see the pain not as blame, but as consequence. The room held its breath as the groom continued reading, each phrase uncovering more than just grievances. I could feel the collective shock ripple through the guests, their eyes widening, mouths opening slightly in disbelief. Some looked at me with sympathy, some with confusion, and some, I imagined, with guilt. The letter was more than words. It was a mirror, reflecting decades of unresolved tension in a single unbroken line of thought. And then came the second twist, carefully planted in a paragraph toward the end. A subtle revelation about an incident long forgotten by most, a secret my parents had never expected anyone to remember. A guest, leaning forward slightly, whispered a question aloud, inadvertently bringing this hidden detail to everyone's attention. The murmurs that followed added a layer of drama I had not entirely anticipated, amplifying the micro cliffhanger I had so carefully designed. I could see the emotional spectrum unfolding before me. My mother's hands trembled slightly, her lips pressed together, eyes glistening as realization struck. My father's jaw tightened, his face an unreadable mask that nonetheless betrayed a flicker of remorse. My sister's cheeks flushed, and for a moment I thought she might break into tears or anger, perhaps both. The letter had not only revealed my perspective but forced them to confront theirs, a confrontation they had carefully avoided for years. And through it all, I remained unseen, a ghost in the corner, my absence magnifying the weight of each word. Even as relief coursed through me at the execution of the plan, a flicker of fear remained. What if this wasn't enough? What if my words did not resonate as I had imagined, but the reactions around me were immediate and undeniable? Faces shifted, murmurs grew louder, the air tinged with tension and recognition. Some guests nodded quietly, connecting the dots in their own minds, piecing together the layers of family history they had only glimpsed before. My heart ached with a strange satisfaction, the thrill of vindication tempered by empathy for the tumult I had unleashed. Then, as the groom reached the final paragraph, my own breath caught. A small detail I had tucked away, almost as an afterthought, emerged in the dialogue between a curious guest and my sister. It was a secret so minor in appearance, yet its timing struck like lightning, a previously hidden act of kindness from years ago, misremembered and overlooked, now cast in a new light. The audience gasped, and I felt the room pivot emotionally, everyone shifting on the axis of shock, anger, and, suddenly, understanding. The micro cliffhanger tightened again, drawing the attention of even the most casual observers. I realized that this unexpected layer, a twist I had not fully controlled, was adding depth and complexity to the revelation. I sank slightly against the wall, letting a fraction of the tension drain, but my mind raced with the awareness that nothing was truly over. The reactions, the murmurs, the subtle shifts in expressions, they all indicated that this was only the beginning of the emotional fallout. And then, my own pulse skipped as I realized something I had not anticipated. A glance from my sister toward another family member, a recognition in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement of a deeper truth. It was a revelation I had not foreseen, one that promised further complications, yet it also underscored the power of the words I had sent into the world. I felt a strange calm settle over me, not the relief of victory, but the clarity of having spoken my truth. The letter had done its work, my voice finally piercing the walls of denial and silence. And yet, in that moment, I understood that the story was far from complete. The hidden dynamics, the grudges, the resentments, some of them would linger, some might shift, and some might even grow in new directions. The micro cliffhanger remained unbroken, the audience still on the edge of what they knew and what they had yet to see. I had set the stage, and now I could only watch as the next act began to unfold. The room was heavy with a silence that felt almost tangible. My parents sat frozen, the lines of their faces deepened by shock and unspoken guilt. My sister's expression wavered between disbelief and frustration, her lips pressed tightly together as she struggled to comprehend the words that had just been read aloud. Every eye in the chapel was fixed on the groom, but I could feel their attention stretching toward me, even though I remained hidden. I had released the truth into the world, and now they had no choice but to confront it. The weight of decades of favoritism, hidden resentment, and silent grievances pressed down on them, forcing them to acknowledge realities they had long ignored. I could sense the tide of emotions beginning to shift. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. My father's jaw tightened, a fleeting flash of anger giving way to the dawning comprehension that his inaction had caused real harm. My sister's posture stiffened, and for a moment I thought she might storm out, but she remained, caught in the crossfire of exposure and guilt. The audience, too, felt it, the shifting currents of tension, the roller coaster of emotions as they witnessed the unraveling of years of suppressed conflict. Some gasped quietly, some exchanged glances, and a few whispered to one another, trying to piece together the family dynamics now so starkly revealed. It was almost overwhelming to watch, knowing that this was only the beginning of the consequences. Every subtle twitch of a hand, every hesitant glance, every breath held and released, added to the symphony of reactions playing out before me. I could almost feel their discomfort, their internal reckonings, and the realization that no amount of explanation could undo what had been said. The truths were now out, floating in the open, undeniable and unavoidable. And yet, amidst the rising tension, I noticed something unexpected, a small, almost imperceptible glance from my aunt across the room. It was brief, fleeting, but it carried an unspoken message, a quiet alignment, a secret support for me that no one else had yet noticed. That tiny spark hinted at alliances hidden in the shadows, foreshadowing a layer of the story that had yet to emerge. As the emotions in the room escalated, I felt my own heart begin to unclench. a slow release of the tight coil of stress and grief I had been carrying for years. The sense of vindication, of having my voice heard and my experiences acknowledged, was profound. And yet, it was complicated, laced with uncertainty and worry about the aftermath. How would they process this? Would relationships be irreparably damaged, or would the truth finally create a path toward understanding? The questions swirled in my mind, but they did not overpower the relief I felt at having acted, at having seized control of my narrative instead of remaining silent. I found a quiet corner away from the watchful eyes of family and guests, and for the first time allowed myself to truly absorb what had just occurred. My knees pressed against my chest, and I rested my head in my hands, letting the tears fall freely. The sobs came in waves, a mixture of grief, release, and exhaustion. I thought about the countless moments in my life when I had been overlooked, the little slights that had piled up into mountains of sorrow. For the first time in years, I acknowledged them fully, feeling the weight lift slightly with each breath, each tear. It was a private mourning, a pause in the storm of emotions, and it allowed me to connect deeply with my own humanity. Through my tears, I reflected on the path that had brought me here, the years of silent endurance, the careful observation of family dynamics, the planning of a moment that would finally assert my existence. I realized that while the letter had exposed truths, it had also begun to shift the balance, to create openings for honesty, accountability, and perhaps reconciliation. The tension, once unbearable, was now a living, dynamic force that could shape the relationships in ways that were unpredictable, yet profoundly real. Even as I sat in that moment of quiet reflection, a part of me could not help but scan the room, alert for reactions, searching for the subtle cues that might indicate the next moves of my family. My aunt's earlier glance, now more vivid in my memory, seemed to suggest that not everyone was fully aligned against me. Perhaps there were others, hidden supporters who had quietly recognized the imbalance, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The thought offered a flicker of hope, a hint that this story was far from over, that the events of the wedding day might be the beginning of a new chapter rather than the end of the narrative. I took a slow, deliberate breath, allowing myself to feel both the relief and the anxiety, the sorrow and the empowerment. The letter had done its job, and yet the aftermath would demand careful navigation. Relationships would need mending, emotions would need tending, and the echoes of this day would reverberate far beyond the walls of the chapel. And through it all, I sat there, quietly acknowledging the complexity of my feelings, letting the audience experience the full spectrum of human emotion alongside me. Shock, anger, sorrow, relief, and the faint glimmer of hope. In that stillness, I realized that the story was not just about exposure or confrontation. It was about self-recognition, about reclaiming a voice that had been ignored for far too long. The micro cliffhanger lingered, a subtle tension that hinted at future revelations, at hidden supporters waiting in the wings, at consequences yet to unfold. And for the first time that day, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile, acknowledging the power of having survived, observed, and finally acted. I walked out of the chapel into the cool evening air, the soft glow of lanterns casting gentle light across the courtyard. The chaos and intensity of the ceremony had faded, leaving behind only the echoes of emotions that had been unleashed. I inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs, and for the first time that day, allowed myself to feel something lighter than the tension and grief that had carried me through the morning. I realized that I had survived the storm. More than that, I had asserted my presence, my voice, and my truth in a space where I had once been invisible. The journey here had been arduous. Years of feeling overlooked, underestimated, and undervalued had created a lingering ache I had carried silently. But now, standing alone, I recognized a strength I had not fully acknowledged before. The power of my words, the courage to reveal the hidden fractures in my family, and the clarity of my own perspective had given me a sense of liberation I could not have anticipated. I had moved from the emotional abyss of feeling rejected to a place of internal empowerment where my worth was no longer tied to the acknowledgement of others. It was a small but profound transformation, a personal shift that resonated deeper than the events themselves. I found a quiet bench beneath an old oak tree, the rustle of leaves above me offering a moment of sanctuary. Sitting there, I allowed myself to reflect on the past, the moments of hurt, the subtle exclusions, the long-held grudges that had been ignored or misunderstood. And yet, as I revisited these memories, I noticed a subtle reframing. The pain was still present, but it was tempered by understanding that my family's actions were a reflection of their own limitations, not my value. That realization, small but powerful, allowed a sense of clarity to settle within me. My self-worth was not contingent upon their approval. It existed independently, unwavering and real. Even as I sat in contemplation, the events of the day continued to ripple through my thoughts. I replayed the moment the letter had been read, the shifting expressions of family and guests, and the subtle, almost imperceptible signals from those who had quietly supported me. I smiled faintly, recognizing that the reactions were complex, layered with surprise, guilt, empathy, and curiosity. Some family members were still processing the revelations, their silence heavy with introspection. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, not from triumph, but from knowing that I had created a space for honesty, however uncomfortable to exist. Yet the evening was not without surprises. As I rose from the bench, preparing to leave the courtyard, I overheard a fragment of conversation that stopped me in my tracks. A cousin I had never thought particularly observant mentioned an old incident, one that involved my sister and a long-forgotten secret about my parents' past. The words were brief, casual, almost offhand, but they carried a weight that sent a shiver through me. A new layer of truth, one I had not expected to encounter, had emerged in the aftermath of my revelation. It was subtle, delicate yet undeniable, hinting at complexities that were still hidden beneath the surface of our family history. The micro cliffhanger tightened in my mind. What else had been buried, waiting for its moment to surface? I paused to absorb the implications, a mixture of curiosity and cautious anticipation swirling through me. The letter had initiated a chain reaction, uncovering hidden resentments, unspoken grievances, and now an entirely new revelation I had not anticipated. It reminded me that truth is rarely singular. It often unfolds in layers, each one more intricate and revealing than the last. I felt both excitement and apprehension for what might come next, yet I also recognized that my journey, my assertion of self, had fundamentally changed the narrative. For a moment, I allowed myself to simply breathe, to experience the quiet satisfaction of having acted with intention and courage. The evening air wrapped around me like a gentle embrace, and I acknowledged the inner strength that had carried me here. I no longer felt the weight of invisibility. I felt seen, acknowledged, and, most importantly, free from the chains of self-doubt that had plagued me for years. That freedom was intoxicating, a personal triumph beyond the constraints of family approval. And yet, even in this newfound clarity, a sense of suspense lingered. The subtle revelation I had overheard suggested that the story was far from complete, that hidden truths, concealed motivations, and unspoken emotions might yet surface. Would my family truly change? Or would the patterns of favoritism and misunderstanding persist beneath a veneer of civility? The thought hovered in the air, unresolved, creating a living tension that suggested the narrative was still unfolding. I smiled faintly, recognizing the power of an open-ended conclusion, both for myself and for anyone witnessing the story. As I turned toward the quiet street, leaving the chapel behind, I felt a final, profound acknowledgement of my own worth. I was more than the judgments of others, more than the grudges and exclusions, and more than the family dynamics that had once defined my sense of self. I carried within me a knowledge of resilience, courage, and authenticity that could never be taken away. And though the micro cliffhanger lingered, the uncertainty of future revelations, I felt an enduring sense of empowerment and hope. The letter, the day, the revelations, they had not only changed my family, they had changed me.